when I joined the program, I wasn't even able to stand up and shower independently. I was having to use a shower chair. It was unheard of for me to be able to leave my apartment for anything more than occasionally at a medical appointment. I mean, my world had truly become so small, and I was in the thick of it with so many intense symptoms: the light and sound sensitivity, the GI issues, the nerve pain, that heavy, wet cement feeling. And then I remembered getting to do that interview with you, that health transformation interview with you. And that was, I guess, about a year ago now. That was in December 2022, I think. I mean, at that point, I was just so excited for all that progress in about 3 months, right? So it was so big to me then to be able to tolerate a couple Zoom calls, to be able to have a Zoom conversation like this, an interview conversation, and hold my train of thought, because brain fog had been such a big thing back then.
How's it going, guys? Miguel here from CFS Recovery. In this video, we have one of our Thriver coaches, Krista. And the reason we're doing this is it's her 1 year Thriver progress update. Because even though she's a coach in the program right now, she was once a Thriver in the actual program, actually working with the coaches and getting help from us. And then she obviously worked her way up, improved, saw a lot of progress, and then she became a Thriver coach. But it wasn't too long ago when she was mainly housebound, very debilitated, living a very different life than she has been living right now. If you haven't already watched her initial interview, definitely click the link up here. We'll put a link and you can see where she was just over a year ago. And I think in the last year, Krista, you've done so many things, but jumping into it, looking back over the past year, what are some of the most significant changes and things that you've noticed in your health and overall well-being? Is like, I don't even know where to start, but
You know,
it's been a crazy year for you in a good way. Just kind of share that with us.
it's just wild to reflect on it, Miguel. Like, I was thinking back to, where did I start when I found you? It's like I started working with you in August of 2022. And at that point, I was like teetering on that edge of like moderate to severe CFS, long COVID. I was in that darkened room. I was like thinking back to it. When I joined the program, I wasn't even able to stand up and shower independently. I was having to use a shower chair. It was unheard of for me to be able to leave my apartment for anything more than occasionally at a medical appointment. I mean, my world had truly become so small, and I was in the thick of it with so many intense symptoms: the light and sound sensitivity, the GI issues, the nerve pain, that heavy, wet cement feeling. And then I remembered getting to do that interview with you, that health transformation interview with you. And that was, I guess, about a year ago now. That was in December 2022, I think. I mean, at that point, I was just so excited for all that progress in about, I guess, about 3 months, right? So it was so big to me then to be able to tolerate a couple Zoom calls, to be able to have a Zoom conversation like this, an interview conversation, and hold my train of thought, because brain fog had been such a big thing back then. And I think at that point, I was just ecstatic about being able to stand up and shower a couple times a week and not having to use the shower chair anymore. I was walking a couple miles. I was getting off of all my medications, and I think I was still on like a handful of vitamins and a couple other like tablets here and there, but starting to just be able to read books again. But I still hadn't even read a full book at that point. And so just taking the time and taking the moment to reflect back on that, it's just wild what has happened, and how much I've been able to grow and continue to make progress. So I think about it now, and now I can genuinely say that my life is better even than it was prior to developing CFS and long COVID. What kind of stuff have I been able to do? I'll have to share some
Yeah,
pictures
dude,
with you.
there's so many different things you've been able to do. I mean, it'll be hard to share everything, but I think if we break it up into some different buckets, that might help. So let's start with physically.
Hmm.
I think during our first health transformation interview, you weren't even really going on hikes yet. It was just
Hmm.
walking, right?
Yeah.
So maybe touch on the physical things that stood out in the last year. What have you been able to do?
Yeah, so many things. So I've been able to go, there's some national parks here. I've been able to go ride out on boats, and go whale watching with my partner and one of my best friends. I've gone on like major hikes. So I went from just barely being able to walk a couple miles last time we had one of these interviews, to one of my bigger hikes was this hardcore. It was like 12 miles. I think that's about 19 kilometers. It was over 3,300 feet elevation gain, and we went off the maintained trail. So that meant we were like we were on these muddy, steep, like, ravines going through trees and bushes and all this stuff. It ended up being a total of 7 hours of consistent hiking. I mean, I think we stopped and had lunch in there, but otherwise it was 7 hours of hiking in the Santa Monica Mountains. It was pretty brutal. What else have I got to do? I've gotten to go on some
And
beginning
when
back.
really quickly, when was that again? When you did that 19-kilometer, like,
Gosh, it
that
was like
what, 3 months ago, 4 months ago?
probably right around there.
September-ish, August?
Mhm, mhm, yeah,
Sometime around there.
yeah,
So, essentially, basically a year after you started the program,
yes.
a year after you were housebound and even struggling to stand up in the shower, a year later, you're going on these long hikes. Okay, that's awesome.
It's still unreal to me sometimes that that amount of change can happen in that amount of time. And so that was really wild. I've also got to go and started. I'm a beginner, but I'm like backpacking, like where you actually like backpack in your camping gear. You're bringing in your water, you're bringing in your food, go camping. The same day that I set up camp and hiked into camp, be able to do another 10-mile hike on like a mountain range. And then the next day, be able to go ocean kayaking in like sea caves for 3 hours, and I'm not having symptoms. Like there's nothing there. This is the real deal. That's more than I was doing even before I got sick. I never would have been brave enough to go backpacking before.
Yeah. That's real survival mode right there. Like,
Yeah.
literally in the wilderness, right? Tents, you're carrying around your food. That is legitimate survival mode, but you can actually, like,
Mhm.
it doesn't put you into a fight or flight state. It's actually exciting and adventurous.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. And looking back to cognitive was such a tough thing for me. Brain fog was one of my big symptoms. And when I joined the program, just being able to go through like an hour and a half Zoom call, that would wipe me out. And now getting to be a coach and being on all of these calls and being responsive online and being on screens, I think the longest day has been over a 10-hour day of screen tolerance. Before, like 15 minutes of like doing emails, paying bills online would have wiped me out. And now being able to function at that level, the cognitive and the emotional that comes into being on calls like that for 10 hours, and remaining asymptomatic and having a clearer mind to be able to help serve other people. What else am I
Mhm.
doing? Reading full books, like just binge reading, like just books that I enjoy. Being able to just lay in bed cozy and read full books again was something that I missed so much when the brain fog was so intense. And getting to get into and really understand and read higher level research again, and being able to bring that into the program as well. Um, Writing at a higher level, little things that people might take for granted too, being able to just go for a drive and listen to music that you have nostalgia for, or like
Oh,
emotional
yeah. Yeah.
connections to.
Yeah, actually, I remember a lot of the times, like, I would hear a song and then it would remind me of all the dark days, and that was the music I listened to, or I would try to listen to when I was in crashes or really bedridden, and I couldn't do it. It was just too much of an emotional trigger response. But once you start really, really getting better, you can actually go back and listen to those things and you don't have that trigger anymore. So that is another huge sign of making massive progress. So, we talked a little bit about physically what you've been able to do. Emotionally, how have things been, and how is life different now? Now that you've learned a lot of these tools in recovery, you've gone through the gauntlet of learning difficult lessons. How is that translated into, like, you being able to handle emotions and things like that?
Right. And so it's like there's always, the exciting physical side of recovery where we're getting these tangible, more measurable things. But then there's this other side of recovery, like you're bringing up, Miguel, the mental and the emotional. And that is where I truly am living, my quality of life is truly improved compared to where I was prior to becoming ill. So my quality of life is better. I would say that I live my life in a way more balanced way. So I can physically and mentally and emotionally push myself and really challenge myself but I also now know how to rest. And I understand that rest isn't just like physically lying down, but it's also giving myself mental and emotional rest. And that's something like I never had any, I didn't even know that was a thing prior. And I was always in that, like, I was always at some level of that fight or flight before. And I also want to say, like, I think going through recovery, something that was really powerful that you gave me on my 30-day mini challenge, like in my first 2 weeks in the program, was gratitude. And
The
and I
gratitude
rem
journal. Yeah.
I remember that, and I was kinda grumpy about it. I was like, does he know what I'm dealing with right now? Does he understand? Like, what do I have to be grateful for?" And, like, I've shared this on calls, like, my first few gratitude lists, Miguel, were kind of, they weren't my proudest moment. I'm putting things on there like toothpaste and, like, toilet paper, like, I was just reaching for straws at that point. So so intense to think where I started. I just couldn't find anything. I couldn't feel that sense of gratitude at that point. And and that is one of the tasks that I'm absolutely the most grateful for. That gratitude practice that I started in those first few weeks, I've continued to go back to that time and time again and continue to build that into my life, and to where I have so much more gratitude for my life and I don't take things for granted. I don't rush through my walks as something that I just have to do. It's not a checkbox. It's something, get to be out in nature. When you've been in that dark room with CFS, you don't take those things for granted again. And so being able to really tap into that gratitude for all the little things, being able to do a yoga practice, being able to have good food, um, it just really shifted my life because I never took those things. I didn't think about those things. I took them for granted before, truly.
Mhm,
Mhm,
mhm. And one of the cool things to see with a lot of thrivers in the program, or just people in general recovering, is seeing them have these massive wins and mind shifts and make a whole bunch of progress. But even beyond that, continuing to make progress. And you're one of those thrivers who, once they found something that was working and once you gain traction, it's just pouring fuel on the fire. It's like, okay, let's keep doing this. Let's keep implementing it. Cause I find a lot of people can make that progress and then they stop doing the things that got them to that point. Right. But the reason you've been able to make so much progress in this period of time and continue to make progress is you kept implementing, what you learned and keeping it simple. So let's talk about you having adjustment periods, right?
mhm,
After our initial interview, it's not like all the symptoms were completely gone and
yeah.
you didn't have to swat away certain things or you didn't have progress cycles. So, what has it been like dealing with the flare ups of symptoms? And how did you manage to stay motivated and stay on track?
Yeah, thank you for this question too, Miguel, because this is something that I don't think does get talked about, right? We get that health transformation interview, and then people happily ever after, and what happens in between, right? And
Mhm.
this is such a not talked about part of recovery, and there's still those challenges. There's a big part of recovery where you're living life in the foreground, and recovery is still happening in the background, and you still have loads of symptoms, and you haven't fully transitioned into that. From, you're still a little bit fragile. You're not fully anti-fragile yet, right? And so this was big, and I remember still, like, I think towards my birthday, I remember it was like the end of January, early February. I had one of those, like, it's like one of those massive adjustment periods where it's just really thick, as some of our thrivers in the program say, like, it was all the spicy symptoms. It was like some of the day one symptoms, like where you just feel that heaviness, that sense of paralysis. And I really had to go back to the basics and I had to course correct and I had to tell myself, okay, this is the nervous system. You're going to get through this. I had to lean on all of that. But of course, like, our it takes a second. And I want to talk about that because I think, to make it really human, recovery can be messy at times, and we don't nail it. Like, I had to let go of doing recovery perfectly and give myself grace that, like, I was a human going through something really challenging. I wasn't going to nail every adjustment period perfectly. It was going to be messy, and I could still course correct and then still come out of that and still make progress. And so much of my recovery journey was like plugging away, plugging away, plugging away, and then like veering off track and not doing the things that I knew I needed to do, getting distracted, and then having to pull it back on course. And so that's something you talk about so much in the program, that course correction. And that
Mhm.
was something that I had to do over and over again.
Mhm. And for a lot of people, they'll be making a lot of progress and get to a point where they're quite functional, pretty functional, very minimal, if not no symptoms. And then they go out and really do something they haven't done in months or years, and then they'll get symptoms again, and that will kind of freak them out. So,
Mm.
how did you go about handling it? Making lots of progress, living your life again, and then boom, a month or two later, you're slapped with a little bit of an adjustment period. It's almost like a reminder, hey, the CFS, we're still here. You haven't quite gotten out of it. How did you handle those? And what was that like when you did have those adjustment periods that creep back in?
Yeah. I mean, in full transparency, it would take me sometimes a couple days to get back into the practice because like that is a challenging part of recovery where we're doing pretty solid and we're pretty good and we're not really having symptoms, and then you have a big impact like that and it can feel like a setback. And I had to keep working to reframe that. Like I knew that these were on the way to recovery. I knew from everything that we learn and teach in the program that our nervous system goes through these necessary contraction phases, these adjustment periods where, yeah, we get swamped with symptoms. We have a dip in our capacity, and then on the other side of that, I knew from going through enough of these that on the other side of that, there was going to be that capacity for growth and that I was going to move forward. So I had to keep leaning into that, not seeing these periods of discomfort, these very challenging periods, not seeing them as something that was taking me backwards, but actually something that was propelling me forwards, and keep leaning on that because I had at that point, when you're at that stage in recovery, you've gone through quite a
Hmm.
few of these progress cycles. You've gone through these adjustment periods. You're a little familiar with how your body's going to respond. And of course, there's that hook. I felt like CFS had a hook in me for a while where, those doubts, the fears, the worries, those negative thoughts would still want to come on, and they'd come up pretty loud. And it was kind of turning that volume down, swatting away those negative thoughts, going back to week one principles that we talk about. Swat the
Hmm.
thoughts, stay the course.
Hmm. Yeah, keeping it
Mm.
simple, right? Because I think a lot of the times too, sometimes you're doing so well that you do get a little bit rusty in
Mhm.
swatting away thoughts or dealing with symptoms when they do come up. So it happened to me several times over the course of, I don't know, a couple up to a couple years after I got out of the hospital. I'd be completely fine for a few months, and then I'm like, all right, let's do a hard workout. And then after the workout, I'm nauseous for like the next 2 days. I'm like, shoot, I haven't had this in a year. Dang it. And then you start getting ideas in your head. Oh, shoot, I still have this CFS. Does that mean I'm still fragile? But you do get a little bit rusty when it comes to swatting away those thoughts. But I think once you do recognize that and you start actively and consciously putting effort into swatting those things away, it comes naturally. It's not as hard as it is the first time you try implementing this stuff, right?
Right. And like, what is it? Correct me. I'm not sure that is it Bruce Lee? Is it the Bruce Lee quote where it's like, I don't fear the man who's practiced 10,000 kicks once, but the person or the man who's done one kick 10,000 times, that's the person to
Yeah.
watch out for. And that was something that like I held on to because in recovery, I didn't have all of these fancy tools. I didn't have all these different techniques I had done and like dabbled in, but I had these core principles from the program that I'd gone to over and over and over thousands
Hmm.
and thousands of times. So when I needed it, sure, it took me a little while to course correct, but I'd practiced that enough times that I didn't get so far off course. I didn't let myself go down that downward spiral. I brought it back because
Hmm.
I'd practiced that quote unquote kick, that recovery move
Yeah.
loads of times.
Yeah, and you've already carved that neural pathway in your brain, created that, and it just got a little covered up. And then once you start going down those pathways again, it's like, boom. Oh, all the hard work has been done. You've laid the foundation for it. So it's a lot easier to get back to. But it's just really interesting to see that, especially when people start reintegrating back into life, where they won't have symptoms for a while and then boom, it hits. But the cool thing is when you understand the basic science behind this stuff,
Mhm.
it makes it really easy to course correct and stay on track. So let's talk about reintegrating back into life because that's essentially what you've been doing for about the past year. What did that kind of look like and how did that all play out? Like what did you introduce first and how did you know how much to do and what was your approach to that?
Yeah, so like recovery is so interesting because you kind of go through a phase where like in the beginning it's just so much excitement because you're doing all of these things for the first time. And then there's almost to me, there's like a next stage of recovery where you're really back to work. Like you're kind of back in the grind of it. You're rebuilding your life and you're reintegrating. And I think this is an area that if you don't understand how you've recovered and you don't understand and you don't have these tools in place, it can be a sticking point because I remember you
Yeah.
saying this one time ago too. It's like the more life, the more problems. And so your world goes from this very small world, you go through this exciting phase where you're adding in all these cool things, and then you get to this part where like, "Oh, okay, here's some of these old challenges that I had maybe not been responding well to in my life before." So, things like the student loans come back online or the IRS sends you that lovely letter in the mail or, you lose people in your life. You go through these big stressors, and if you don't know how you've recovered, you could easily go back into some of your old pathways, but again, knowing the science behind this, knowing what's going on with the nervous system, and going back to core principles of responding well. And of course, in the early part of recovery, you're focusing on just responding well to symptoms to move forward. But then as you're reintegrating and you're rebuilding, you start to realize that that applies also to all areas of your life. Respond well to the letter from the IRS, respond well to the student loans, respond well to these things that are coming up. And I can look back in hindsight before I found this program, and some of the times I had made progress but then slid back, I had just gone right back into those not so good neural pathways and those negative habits and that downward spiral. But now I have the awareness, the understanding, and the knowledge of what's going on in my brain and my nervous system that if I feel that stuff starting to come up again, I know how to course correct. I know how to respond well to these stressful events in my life. And that's something that I've also got to observe with you and the other coaches in the program. You can handle these pretty big stressful things that go on behind the
Mhm.
scenes, and you truly respond well at a next level, and that's life-changing information.
Yeah, yeah, and I always well, actually, no, I haven't said this, but I should start saying it more, but, the science is your safety net. When you build a strong foundation of how you even recovered in the first place or got to that point of being functional, and you know exactly how you got there, it's really, really hard, if not, like, it's nearly impossible to go backwards unless you do it on purpose. You'd have to ignore so many red flags 'cause the whole purpose for everything we've created here is to help people recover, but stay recovered and get better and better and better over time to the point where they surpass their old quality of life,
Mhm,
right? It's not just to cope with symptoms. We want to empower you guys, show you guys, hey, you have the power within your own brain
mhm.
to recalibrate the nervous system. So there are so many lessons, like you said, in recovery that are transferable. So all the things you're doing now, I mean, it looks like you're doing a lot of adventures. They look super exciting. All the hikes, especially in the summer, in the summertime and spring. Are those things you used to do a lot, or you do more of it now?
I do way more of it now. I
Hmm.
was like I would do small hikes, like maybe 3, 4 miles was like that was my maximum. And it was sprinkled in here and there. There wasn't a lot of consistency. Um, it was just something I would kind of dabble in. I wasn't very committed to it and something I enjoyed, but nothing like this. And so now being able to go for like these 12-mile hikes and something else that I've learned in recovery too is that consistency, staying the course with things and being consistent in the things that I was applying into my life. And I can go for so much more physical activity, and I understand the mental and the emotional component of it too. And maybe this is something that would be helpful to people because I was a physical therapist before, and I understood only to me what is like one third of recovery. I understood like the physical component of recovery, but that wasn't enough to make a well-rounded, stable recovery. I kind of thought of recovery from what I learned within the program as sort of this tripod that I stabilized things on. There is that physical aspect of recovery, but there's also that mental and that emotional component. And I was missing those before in my life before I got sick. And then in my recovery, I was trying to apply only the physical thing. And something that I thought of recovery is like you need to have that physical, but you have to bring the mental, emotional along with it. And that's the way that I was able to climb out of recovery and the way that I was able to continue to reintegrate into my life, bringing that physical component, but also bringing that mental and emotional component as well and staying more balanced. There's just so much more balance in my life now.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm the same way. And once I learned how to get my emotions under control and deal with stress a lot better, everything else kind of fell into place. So, like, even to this day, the way I handle challenges, that has a direct effect on how much fatigue I'm feeling, or how tired I am, or what my recovery time is like, or how hard I can go in the gym, how focused I am when it comes to creating content. So I've realized how much emotion plays a role in all of this. And I know we've done a breakthrough experience with DeMartini together.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting because that stuff is so applicable to CFS, and it's really emotional control at the deepest level. It's getting you out of fight or flight mode. Fight or flight is run by emotions. So it's super, super interesting, you know? So go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say too, this is something to me that doesn't get spoken about in a lot of other like recovery groups that I found too. There's just so much emphasis on like the physical aspect and physical rest and pulling back physically. And when I started on this journey, and it took me a while to shed that fear of physical activity, but it's so rarely spoken about how much like the mental and the emotional stress plays a role in our ongoing health and our ongoing recovery journey. And so just kind of reiterating that, it was just such a big mind shift for me that it was like almost this whole two-thirds of my experience. I hadn't been aware of that at all in my life before. It's like kind of mind blowing that like we go through life and we're not talking about this at all. Like not even just in CFS recovery, but in life in general, that this information really isn't out there like it is. And I appreciate so much. That's the other really exciting part of recovery too, is it shifts from CFS recovery to this self exploration and self development and learning how to manage your emotions and maybe sitting with some emotions for the first time in your life in this way. And just the depth of it just keeps getting better and better.
Absolutely. And, I want to ask you because you've been on hundreds of hours of one on one calls with thrivers in the program, people at all different levels, bedridden, housebound. I mean, you've been responsible along with the other coaches for some pretty miraculous transformations, so to say. These people who are bedridden and could not function, now they're up and about and posting in the wins channel, they're outside, all of these things. In the last year, what is some new information that has really helped in your recovery that you've kind of discovered or developed working with all of these people? What are the patterns, or what is something you didn't know about recovery that you didn't know, like, the last time we spoke or the last time we had this interview, which was a year ago?
And that is like one of the coolest things about this program is it continues to grow and we continue to add in new information. So one of the big things that has been brought into the program that Coach Junior really was at the forefront of was understanding the role of the polyvagal nervous system, or sorry, the polyvagal triangle, and the role of all of those different nervous system states. And so it's really much more fluid to understand where people are moving up and down this triangle that we go into. But as a coach, that translates into being able to help people with a really secure plan to move through these different phases of recovery and have a really solid grasp of where they are. And, something else too that has really kind of struck me, and maybe this is more of a personal thing, but I think this is for people that are listening to this at all different stages. The more I've been on all of these calls, something that's really like struck me is how much more alike we all are than we are different. Because I remember when I was just listening to interviews like this and I was in that darkened room still, and I was, you know, I don't know, you feel so different. You feel so alone. You feel so unique in your experiences. It feels scary, isolating, and you think, maybe I'm the one that none of this will work for. And the more I've been on calls with people too, I've realized how common so many of our experiences, even if we have slightly different symptoms, we all have so many more commonalities than we are different. And in that, I think is something that's really powerful because it's like if I can recover, if Miguel can recover, if any of these other coaches can recover, we're all so much more alike than we are different. And we can all make that recovery. And we now have that information in the program with the understanding of the polyvagal theory to really cleanly help people with really direct plans make consistent progress.
Yeah, and I think that's a huge thing, is being able to have that predictable, duplicatable system that we can apply to people in different stages of their recovery, but nonetheless, the journey is very similar for
Mhm.
every single person. They will go through the different stages of that polyvagal triangle. They'll move up and down in that triangle. So now we know within which stage of that triangle what the best course of action would be. to improve the odds of success. So it's just really cool to see what the team has built in the last year working together, bringing you guys to workshops, us applying it in the program, and also supplying it to our lives. I know you used it for some curveballs life threw at you,
Yeah.
and you're using a lot of principles that you learned in the program.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was like something that happened in May for me. And this is where understanding again, having the awareness, understanding what's going on in the nervous system, having these tools to stay well emotionally, I I was able to navigate a really challenging time in May. My mom passed away in May. This was also when I got the letter from the IRS the next week. And then the following week I had a colleague of mine that I'd been very close to, who was quite young, also unexpectedly pass away the day after Mother's Day. So it was from early May, those few weeks like that, and even the version of me before I got sick, going through all of those multiple hardships like that, I would not have had the tools to respond well. That would have been, it was challenging. It was really emotionally hard, but that would have been so devastating for me. And I can see if I didn't have the information from the program, that could have been a potential for a relapse. But because I
Hmm.
understood what was going on, I understood all these other components, I was able to stay afloat in that. And even, I mean, even going back the last, I guess last month, like the last few weeks when I'd been so sick, I was like
Yeah.
down. It was 3 weeks of a really gnarly virus, and some of the old thought patterns, some of those old neural pathways and the trauma around having had COVID and being back in bed and feeling so sick. If I wasn't aware of those roles that our thoughts and emotions play, something like that could have been a relapse. And I think that's
Hmm.
something that our program offers is it's like it's almost like relapse insurance because you understand what's happening and you can catch it. You can really nip it before you go back down those old pathways.
I love that term. It's the first time I've heard it. Relapse insurance. It's kind of what it is. And the knowledge is basically that's like insurance. It's the science is your safety net. And I'm not talking about like knowing every mitochondrial function, this and that. I'm talking
Right.
about the basic science and the frameworks of how people get into this, how they stay in it, but also how to reverse it and get on the upward spiral versus the downward spiral. So for you, prior to getting this nasty sickness, I also got super sick. What is it, December at the time of this recording? It's January 2024. But I was sick. Adrienne got sick. Our another Thriver coach, you got sick. Colin got sick, who was helping out with the coaching. I think Junior got sick a few weeks before. So there was something going around. All of us were feeling it and it was
Yeah.
sticking. But prior to that, did you have any more symptoms that you were experiencing day to day?
Actually, not really, no. Like, I mean, even at this far out, like, I wouldn't be surprised, right? I never underestimate the nervous system if something comes up. I wanna say, though, this is, like I wanna clarify this. There's, like to me,
Mhm.
there's the severe CFS symptoms, and then there's I don't want people to think you get to the other side of recovery and you never have quote, unquote, "symptoms." Like, if I really push it, would I maybe get a headache? Sure. Well, if I'm really maxing out, I do a 10-hour day, I'm a bit more like quote unquote foggy or tired the next day or a little bit like I'm a normal person that still experiences that like breath of human experience where yeah, those kinds of things still happen, but it's nothing like it is when you're in the depths of it with CFS. It's not that intense, relentless kind of stuff. So you're still a human. It's not all sunshine and rainbows all the time where you don't maybe feel cruddy for a few days, but it's definitely there's nothing that I can even begin to compare it to when you're in the
Mhm.
trenches with CFS.
Yeah, I actually just filmed a video about this yesterday. What does it mean to be what does fully recovered mean? Um, Probably but by the time this video comes out, this video should be on my YouTube channel. You could watch it right up here, guys. But yeah, fully recovered, I think that's something people fear is, oh, once I get better, is there a possibility that I might just relapse? Well, the way I describe it is you'd almost have to intentionally put yourself into situations where you do crash because it would take a lot. It would take a lot of ignoring the signs, not listening to your body, falling into the same old habits physically and mentally and emotionally. It would take all of those things together to put you back to where you were before. And on top of that, maybe getting COVID, and it would take a lot, right? So
Yeah.
for you guys watching this, when you recover, you could build yourself up to where you can go on a 20-kilometer hike if you build up to it. You can do this, you could do that, but you also have to be kind of responsible, right? If I wanted to get CFS again, I would know exactly how to do it. And it would be a bunch of very dumb decisions, but I would know how because now I know the science of how this stuff works. But, it's not like you're going through life and then boom, AP out of nowhere. You'll know why. You'll know why you got it by the time you reach that point of being that functional.
Yeah.
So, you know, very interesting to see. So, you had minimal symptom, almost no symptoms, basically.
Just normal human
Normal
experience too.
tiredness.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. Yeah, and it's even on a day where maybe I'm like, "Oh, I need that cup of coffee this morning," like,
yeah,
you can't even like, if you know what, like, CFS brain fog is, you can't even begin to, like, call it the same thing. It's just like, I'm a little, I just need some coffee." Like, and I'll be fine in
yeah,
an hour or 2. It's nothing like where you can't even form words or you can't even like, I can't remember the name for basic things. I was doing the wildest things around the house and like spiraling with it. I mean, it was really intense with that stuff. And I think something else that is good on this conversation of like recovery too. When we are in recovery, we can get kind of caught up in putting percents on it, right? Like,
yeah,
what percent recovered am I? Am I this percent recovered? Am I that percent recovered? But if we're still comparing it to our old life, we might actually be selling ourselves a bit short because
100%.
like, what I thought like, if I was just aiming for my old life, what I thought was 100%, it wasn't 100%. I had more room on the other side. I was maybe, like, 65,
Yeah,
70%. Like
yeah, absolutely. I think that's a huge point to touch on, and I also just that's something I talked about in the that YouTube video as well. Is I wish I could almost go back to all of my YouTube videos, and whenever I mention recovering or fully recovered, I change it out with you're optimizing your health or your
Mhm,
health is optimized. But I think recovery, people set this finite goal, this singular point that, okay, once I get there, boom, that is my mission in life. I'd be happy if I just had that. But I love how you put it. Yeah, you are selling yourself short because okay, what happens after you recover? What happens when you get to that level of functionality? What next? Right? That's just a milestone. That's a checkpoint on the journey of life that you're going to get past. But that's really when your life begins, actually. That's when your second life begins. Sorry, your third life. I say there's three lives. There's your life before CFS, your life with CFS, and then your life after. And they are three very, very different lives. You don't have your pre CFS life, then CFS life, and then you go back to your pre CFS life. No, no, no. It is a completely different perspective you have on everything. So, that fully recovered, I look at it as, your health is optimized. And instead of recovering, you are optimizing your nervous system because it'll always go up and down. There are days where I skip the gym because I'm pretty darn tired and I know it wouldn't be smart force myself to go do it. But that's how I think of it now. We're optimizing our nervous systems. And sometimes we'll need to take a break. Sometimes we'll feel tired. Other times we could push harder, but you learn to find that balance. So for you, what are some things you're looking forward to in the next year or so with your health? Is there anything you want to do? Anything on your bucket list? What does that look like?
yeah, there is it's just endlessly exciting. So there's what else do I wanna do? I think now I'm at the stage in recovery where I'm very much more interested in like self-development and
Hmm.
really like you're talking about optimizing health. I went through a phase in recovery where I just ate whatever I wanted whenever I wanted it. Cheetos, like I know you did, Miguel, pizza, Taco Bell, all those things. And now
Oh yeah.
now I'm at that stage in my recovery where it's like fun and exciting for me to see where I can continue to optimize my health. So I'm looking forward to cleaning up my diet. I'm looking forward to doing a lot more yoga and a lot more strengthening. I'm looking forward to taking a lot more self development courses through with DeMartini, like you mentioned earlier, continuing to expand those. And something I'm also really excited about is so much in my life before I was like chasing externals for
Yeah.
external sake. I was always after that degree or the next continuing education course. But it's so different for me now to say I want to take something like this, a DeMartini course, because it's so much more. internally driven by my values and what I prioritize in my life, and also how I can be of service to other people. And it sounds nuanced, but it's a really important distinction where I'm not looking for an external to fix my life or, I don't know, give me something to grab onto, but there's an internal drive that is very different, and there's that internal source that's become very different as I've gone through recovery, and it's kind of a hard thing to put to words. And I don't know if you've experienced something like that as well, where it's shifted the way that you go about life and the way you're putting these markers on your life.
Hmm. Absolutely. And I've heard, I was at a workshop over the weekend, and the topic of chronic fatigue syndrome came up, and health, and the reason we get symptoms. And you know, DeMartini was mentioning all symptoms are a feedback mechanism to get us closer to our most authentic self, to get us back on track with what we were put on this planet to do. And this topic, it might sound really airy fairy to some people. Now we're talking about, okay, life purpose, mission, this and
Yes.
that. But if we think about it, that's kind of what happened, because had we not gotten CFS, where would our life have taken us, right? Most of the time, in fact, I haven't met a single person who got CFS or long COVID and their life leading up to that was chill, was, working out pretty well. It's usually chaos, usually unsustainable, usually a one-way track, like it's like a car going off a cliff.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of time before that was going to happen. It just so happened that maybe COVID got you or something happened to it was the straw that broke the camel's back. So then you got sick, and then you were forced to sit there and lie there and analyze what led me to this point. Let me think about my own thoughts. Let me spend all these months or years with my own thoughts and figure out, what do I really want to do out of life if I ever had that opportunity. So I think, just like we've heard DeMartini say, I don't want to make this too much about DeMartini, but your voids become your values. Your voids create your values. So when you are in a place when you can't do all the things you want to do, you can't walk, you can't function,
Mhm.
you can't see friends, you learn to value those things a lot more. And that's when you realize what is really important to you. For me, I wanted to be the top personal trainer. Okay, I got that. Then what? Right? That led me to getting sick. So that really wasn't my purpose. Right now, it's having impact around the world. It's becoming the best version of myself, personal development, health. I'm working out a lot in a lot more sustainable of a way now. But I think having CFS, it is in the grand scheme of things, it's an opportunity to recreate yourself. The thing about this is you have no choice but to recreate yourself, because that's the only way out, right?
Ah, there's so much in what you just said too that I'm like want to hold on to, because I remember early on when you're still stuck in bed and all I would think about is like, I just want my old life back. I just want my old life
Yeah.
back. If I could just have that. And then I would listen to these kinds of interviews and people would be talking about, how they had to change their lives and chose to change their lives, let's say. And I was always like, I had this little snarky voice. Like, if people are really recovered, can't they just go live their life however they want to do it? Like, why are they making these changes if they're fully recovered? I had this little like troll voice that was pretty negative about it.
Yeah.
But now on the other side of recovery, something that I always wanted to hear people say is like, I more than have the capacity to go back to my old life. I could go back to my old way of living. And I think I could make it sustainable if I chose to, because I would know how to respond differently to things. And I don't wanna go back to that old way
Exactly.
of life, because so many of those ways of being and behaving and personality traits I had, I can now see were were driving illness. They were certainly keeping me stuck, at least in CFS. And I'm not saying we made ourselves sick, but I am saying that these things played a role in my nervous system becoming dysregulated. And then you have the opportunity to rebuild your life. Why would you go back and just do that same thing over again? It's like you've gone through the trenches, you've learned all of these lessons, you've come out the other side, and now you can grow. And then to me, a big part of this is being of service to others. And I hear that in you too, Miguel. Like, helping make the world a bit better place, letting this ripple out, this information ripple out to help more and more life, so less and less people have to stay stuck in that darkened room or go through those intense symptoms for as long as some of us had. Because your journey was quite long. I think it was like 4.5, 5 years, long time
Mhm.
to go through that as a young person too. And it's not easy. So it's like you put all this work. Why would you just go back to that? And I couldn't understand that when I would hear these things. I was like, you're recovered. Just do what you want to do. Yeah, but that changes so much on the other side of recovery. You've learned so many lessons that you never learned. And we talk about gratitude and we talk about how I like struggled in the beginning for gratitude for toothpaste and toilet paper. And now I'm going to say something that's really wild for anyone who's listening to this who's been through CFS. I can now truly have gratitude for having gone through this journey with CFS. And that's something I could never have said before. And I understand if that doesn't resonate with people. But to see the lessons that I learned, to see the person that I've got to come out the other side of has been so exciting. It's been worth the struggle. And that was
Mhm.
something I could not have heard before. But that gratitude practice and finding gratitude, not just for the things that are comfortable and easy, but even for the hardships in our life. And that's such a shifted way of thinking that I could never have even resonated with early on.
Yeah, yeah, that's powerful. And I want to kind of piggyback off that. You could have gone back to your old job. You had the capacity to do it, but you didn't want to do it. And I think that's the important thing. You didn't want to do it. And I think when people do things they don't truly want to do for themselves, and they're kind of they're doing it for external accolades or recognition or things like that, then your life will give you feedback. Your body will give you feedback. Hey, we don't
Mhm.
truly want to do this. Here's CFS. So I had something similar. When I got out of the hospital, about a month after, I went back to go to the gym for personal training because everybody knew me there. I was like, okay, let's pick up where we left off. And then I noticed the pattern. I was like, wait a minute. What is the long game here? What does this look like 6 months, 12 months, 2 years from now? Because I know myself, I'm going to add on one client, then three more clients, then five clients, and 10. Next thing you know, I'm going to be right in the same trap. And then I'm going to feed this cycle. So I had the choice of, do I go back to my old life, have a bit of financial security or something coming in? Because I was broke at the time. I was like 30 grand in debt. It was bad. So do I do that and be inauthentic, or do I do something I really want to do, which is video production and media? And do I, bite the bullet and stay broke for a while? And I was like, screw it. I'll stay broke and do something I want to do, because at least I'll have my health. At least I'll have my sanity. And so that, I guess, looking back now, that was the right decision because it led to where I am today. But for you, maybe just talk about letting go of the old Krista, because I'm sure for the longest time you were holding on to that identity, that version of yourself. But now it's so obvious you recreated yourself into this Krista 2.0. So what was it like letting go of that Krista, and how did you go about that?
It's an interesting one too, Miguel. So something I wanted to touch on that I was thinking about as you were speaking, and it ties into this is again, it was back to like some of our early check-in calls and some of those early interactions. And I remember you asking me, and this is where it started to shift for me. You're like, well, what do you actually enjoy doing? Like, find the things that bring you joy and bring those into recovery. And I don't remember if I cried on the call with you, but I definitely cried after the call because I was so detached from even knowing what I actually enjoyed. I had been like prioritizing things in my life that I didn't really enjoy, but that I thought I should and that I had to do. And so that call was actually the kernel of that transition where I started to ask myself, what does Krista actually enjoy? Like again, I've been chasing these externals. I've been doing the things that I should do to survive, right? I've let go of my art. I've let go of creativity. I've let go of certain things and I've put myself in some really rigid boxes and made some great successes with that. He got some good degrees and had a decent
Yeah.
profession and there was things there, but I was so detached from my authentic self and what actually brought me joy that that was like a transition for me to start to build that. And it came along with me in that recovery journey. And what did I actually enjoy? And
Mhm.
starting to find that and foster that. And it was even so interesting because I found as I was going through that little troll voice that we talked about, that inner critic was very critical of things that I enjoyed. And one of the things I realized I really did enjoy was interacting with other people that were on their way recovering from chronic illness and being on Instagram and being on social media and getting to help people. I realized that's something that I was doing for free. Like I would give that, even when I was still in the trenches, trying to extend, that rope or that ladder or it just resonated to be of service to people in that way, in that depth of need. And I remember sitting down at one night, and it was like I was still in the thick of it, and I just wanted to write an Instagram post, and I could feel that inner critic being like, you know, what are you doing? You barely have energy for X, Y, and Z. You should be doing all these other things, and like should, that should voice. And starting to swat that away and say, like, no, this is actually something that I value, and then lean into that. And it was a really uncomfortable, really unfamiliar thing. And I've seen this too. We talked about, you know, what do I see some patterns on these calls? I see this with a lot of our thrivers too. This is a challenging question for many of us. What do you actually enjoy when you're sitting there with yourself? What actually brings you joy that you're not running away from? That's not another go, 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 or a should, or a survival mechanism. Like, what do you value? And that's a tough question. And that was that seed that you planted for me that started that transition, and letting some of those old ways like kind of shed off that old identity, and lean into this new version of myself.
Hmm. And that's how I see it too. It's kind of like you're shedding this identity. It doesn't all come. It doesn't all fall off at once. It's like bits and pieces you learn to let go of. I used to be a personal trainer. Well, okay, great. I used to be the top selling personal trainer. Great. That was then. I used to be super, super fit. Any physical challenge, I'm up for it, and I would crush it. Cool. That was Miguel then. Do I need that now? No. I'm a different person. And then the question goes deeper is, okay, what was I doing all of that for anyways? Why did I want to be the top trainer? Why did I want to be super jacked and the smartest person in the room? What was that? What void was I trying to fill? And then you can go real deep with this, but you also have to be super honest as well. And I think that's the difficult part, because when you are shedding certain parts of your identity, it can sting a little bit, and it can hurt
Mhm.
to let go sometimes temporarily, because you're letting go of a part of yourself that has gotten you all these accolades in the past. But as you shed these things, it creates space for new growth and for you to reinvent yourself. And that's the cool thing about this. Once you start coming out of this, like let's say back in December when we had our initial interview, or our transformation interview, shortly after that, you're making progress. You go through your adjustment period, then you come out of it in the springtime. It's almost like you have a blank canvas, and you are the artist of this canvas. You can add things into your life, you can take things out. What do you want your life to look like? But that's the cool part. Once you come out of this, once you get to that level of functioning where you can do things again, it's like, what do you want to paint on that canvas? Because you can add anything you really want. You can go anywhere from here. But also, that's where people can feel a bit lost, because it's like, I don't know what's up, down, what's forward, backwards. I just got plopped back into life. I don't know where to go from here. But that's where you have the blank canvas, and you use your mind to kind of create that life, that future that you want.
Yeah. Yeah. And in this too, it's like, how do I want to say this? When I started out on my recovery journey, and in this program and stuff, we would start to talk about like, do you have to change your personality? Like, do you have to
Hmm.
become a whole different personality? And you remember how scary that kind of sounded. I was like, well, I don't know.
Yeah, it's
Krista's
scary.
okay. What do I like? What does that even mean? And how do I do that? And does it have to be this drastic 180, and like, what the heck, like, I don't know, what are we talking about here? And kind of going through recovery was one of those things too. It's like you do learn to do things layers by layers, and like that gradual shedding off of things. And so some of my old personality traits, like the overachiever, super perfectionistic self, getting okay at being messy and doing things imperfectly, and that's let me be ultimately more authentic and show up for the people in my life more the way I would want to be, more real, and create real relationships that have continued to grow with me. And I couldn't understand that in the beginning, and so understanding that some of those shifts just come naturally as you're going through recovery, and you learn that these things aren't serving you, and they're not something you want to carry with you. They're not something you're going to put
Hmm.
on that canvas on the other side. And so that was a big shift for me too, is realizing it wasn't going to be this drastic 180 like in the beginning, but when I look from where I started to where I am now, it might look that way, and that it's hard when you're just observing that externally. But all this stuff came off gradually, practicing being imperfect, letting myself be messy, letting myself be real. And realizing so many of these things were survival mechanisms. I was super hyper independent before, didn't ever want to ask for help, and realizing that community and asking for help and reaching out cultivates friendships and authenticity and I don't know. So many things like that that have come out through the other side of this recovery journey as I'm kind of creating this 2.0 version of myself. It's been exciting to experience.
Yeah, it's been super exciting and super cool to witness having been part of your journey, not since day one, but I think since we really started turning things around. I
Yeah.
think from
Oh
our
yeah.
initial interview for you coming into the program, I've had the privilege of witnessing a lot of this stuff unfold and to see you go from old Krista, Krista 1.0 to Krista 2.0 and beyond. It's just super cool, as it is with everybody in the programs. That's the cool thing about being able to work with these people. So yeah, this has been an amazing chat. I feel like we could talk for 5 more hours. This has just flown by these past 57 minutes. But is there anything else you want to share with people who are kind of in your stage right now where they've gone through the trenches, they've come out of the trenches, and they're a few steps behind you and they're starting to reintegrate back into life, um, and they're feeling a little bit lost, or they just would like to hear from you? What is some tips and advice and anything you want to share with them?
Yeah. I'm a broken record on this one, Miguel, and all my thrivers that work with me know it's like when in doubt, go back to the basics, stick to the basics. And something that has continued to help me on this side of recovery, and I know again, broken record, but it really is that 3 foot world analogy, that analogy of those rock climbers that are on that sheer face. And the only way you're going to move forward is that next step. And that has continued to be something I go back to. I have my North Stars, I have those goals that I've set. And sometimes still, even on this side of recovery, being super functional, having most of my life back, having this capacity, there still can be moments where it gets overwhelming. And I do have to come back into my 3 foot world and just take that very next step. And that's the way we move forward. It is just that very next step and keeping it reasonable, keeping it chunked down and small and applying that to our life. That will propel you forward. It doesn't have to get big and complicated. Even though your life has gotten bigger, still keep it simple. Go back to the
Mhm.
basics, that next step, that gratitude practice, those things that fill you and bring you joy. Balancing life and rest. Don't forget that stuff because all those things have served you this far in your recovery. They will continue to serve you. And there's so much more growth on the other side.
Mhm. Yeah, beautifully put. Beautifully put. So, Krista, I appreciate your time and sharing, some updates with us, and we'll do this again in another year and see how far you've come again. And yeah, it's just amazing to see how much can change in just a year or a year and a half. And your previous video that was filmed just over a year ago, and even just how you look like a different Krista, much healthier, much more.
Yeah.
Your skin is way healthier. You're glowing. You can feel the energy. It's just different in a really good way. So I'm excited to just work with you to help more people all around the world. You're one of our amazing Thriver coaches. And if you guys watching this right now, if you're watching this and you're still trying to figure out what the right thing to do is, or how to get on track, or how to make progress, and you're still stuck kind of spinning your tires, or maybe you just need a bit of extra support, reach out to us. We have so many resources in place now, obviously this YouTube channel, but we also have programs that we've created that are now very affordable for people. There's no long-term commitment, but you can learn more about how we're helping people. Click the link down below, and we're working with people all over the world right now to give you that support you need, more than just here are the video modules, or more than just hey, here's some group coaching calls. We will actually work with you to create a plan and map out your recovery. So if you did need that extra help, again, click the link down below. If you guys got some value out of this one, comment down below what's your biggest takeaway from this video. What is something that caused you to have a mind shift? What's something that you found super useful? But other than that, great to have you guys here. Remember, you are a thriver and you are just one mind shift away from living a life with thriving health. So we'll see you guys in the next video. Thank you so much, Krista.
Thank you.